Hi, and welcome to another episode of Inside 365. Last time I spoke about Azure Information Protection and how you can use that system to protect data regardless of where it is stored. And today I want to continue talking about security, but also take a step back and talk about the system that underpins all of it, Azure Active Directory. When we talk about Azure Active Directory, most people immediately make the link with Microsoft Server, Windows Server Active Directory on premises, and that's only normal because they share a quite similar name. But in fact, both systems are dramatically different, and that is because Azure AD is purpose-built for the cloud. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't resemble Windows Server Active Directory, because some of the features that existed on premises and that were born on premises obviously made it into Azure Active Directory in some shape, way, or form. But both systems are not the same. It's not like Azure AD is just a bunch of domain controllers hosted in Azure. That is entirely not the case. And that shines through in capabilities like, for instance, conditional access, privileged identity management, the capabilities to federate with other solutions, but also identity protection. There's much more in Azure AD compared to what we have in Windows Server Active Directory. Now, to be fair to Windows Server Active Directory, comparing both of them would kind of be like comparing oranges to apples. So let's focus just on Azure Active Directory for today. Azure AD is used either directly or indirectly by most online services. For instance, Exchange or SharePoint, they do leverage Azure Active Directory, but they go through their own directory store. So Exchange has a directory store called ExoDS, Exchange Online Directory Services, and the same is true for SharePoint and Skype for Business. Now, the information that lives in those directories comes directly from Azure AD. For instance, organizations that synchronize their on-premises environment with Azure AD will ultimately have their information synchronized through an internal process from Azure AD to Exchange Online, and obviously changes that are made in Exchange Online or SharePoint Online find their way through that same synchronization process back to Azure Active Directory. Now, those are three workloads which are a little bit different because they're not born in the cloud, and they were essentially changed to work in a cloud environment. But other newer capabilities, most of the time, immediately talk to Azure Active Directory. And to be fair, for an end user, there is no difference because it's very transparent. They don't see it. It's just for an administrator, sometimes there are some little differences that they have to take into consideration. But all in all, this backsync process or this internal synchronization process is fairly smooth, and there isn't much that you can do or should do about it, except for maybe sometimes talk to support and kick off the process if it hangs. But that luckily doesn't happen very often. Now, Azure AD is, as I said, used by a lot of other systems, and it's not that it's just a directory store like Windows Server Active Directory where an application literally just uses it to store identities. Although you could do that with Azure Active Directory, there is much more in there that you can use to enhance the manageability of your environment or secure it even further than what you might already have done. Speaking of security, there is a ton of features in Azure Active Directory that you definitely have to check out. There is conditional access, privileged identity management, there is identity protection, there is the Azure AD app proxy. There's a lot of things that you can use independently or together to increase the security posture of your environment. Now, speaking of all these capabilities today would take us much longer than the 10 minutes that I allow for myself, but be on the lookout for new videos regarding each of these features because they are really, really interesting. And you can use them both on premises and in the cloud or in a hybrid environment equally the same. So that's really great for organizations that are making the move to the cloud rather than the ones that are cloud-born, which, to be honest, most organizations that have been around for a long time aren't. Most of them are still on premises and are still making their way in some way to Office 365. Azure AD is much more than an identity store. It also handles authentications for all systems connected to it. It means that Microsoft has millions of users for which it has billions of authentications, and it can leverage that information to secure the authentication process, and they do so because they take that information, put it through their AI systems, and learn what a good and bad authentication is. This is one of the benefits that Azure AD offers you over what you have on premises, because on premises you do not have those signals, you do not have those capabilities. And although there are some systems that allow you to leverage part of that AI-fed information to further secure the authentication process on premises, it is much more elaborate and much more secure in Azure AD. So that should answer the question whether or not Azure AD is more secure than what you have on premises. But in addition, there's other things to consider, right? A lot of organizations, when they start to think about the cloud, they think about the solutions they want to consume. They think about Exchange, they think about SharePoint, OneDrive, and rightfully so. Those are really important features, and they are the core of what your users have to do. But especially in these days, when data breaches are far and few in between, basically on a daily basis, you have to be mindful about security. And this is where I think a lot of organizations don't realize the value they get from Azure AD. They tend to focus on the workloads they're purchasing in Office 365, but they do forget that they're getting Azure AD almost for free, right? They get the basic version for free, but if they buy M365 E3 or E5, they get Azure AD Premium P1 and P2, which gives you access to those capabilities like conditional access, privileged identity management, and so forth and so on. And that is the beauty, because you can leverage those systems to protect your investments in Office 365, but you should also start using Azure AD to protect your on-premises workloads. For instance, the Azure AD App Proxy allows you to use your cloud accounts or your synchronized cloud accounts even to authenticate your on-premises resources, but at the same time leverage the security capabilities that live in Azure AD. But when you take one step further, outside of what you have on premises, you can also start leveraging Azure AD as your source for all other cloud applications. You can easily connect those cloud applications to Azure AD and secure the authentication process through it. As such, you don't only get more security for those systems, like for instance Salesforce, but you also get the centralization, that harmonization of the authentication process across services in Office 365, across cloud services elsewhere, and even across services that you have on premises, which in itself is an additional security benefit that you get. As I started off with, Azure AD is much more than an identity store or an authentication system. It has all these capabilities that together can increase security and manageability of your environment. And unfortunately, even though I would love to talk about each of these products independently in this video, would carry us way too far. So in the next few videos, I'll definitely talk a little bit more in detail about conditional access, what it does, about privileged identity management and identity protection. But one key takeaway I'd like you to take home with you today is that Azure AD is a very powerful system, but not just for Office 365. As an organization, you should really rethink your identity strategy and see how you can leverage Azure Active Directory to connect it to other systems in the cloud and on premises and use that as your centralized environment. Now, I'm not saying that you'll get there today or tomorrow, and it might take you a while, but rethinking how you do identities today will definitely help you further secure your environment in the future. And it doesn't mean that you'll have to do away with ADFS today, or you will have to stop synchronizing today, because let's face it, you can't really do that with some of the capabilities lacking and with some limitations that still exist in other workloads. But slowly and surely, we're getting to the point where you can definitely leverage Azure AD as a central system. And as such, what you think of today, what you design today, will be your system of tomorrow. So whatever you do when you move to Office 365, if you're in Office 365, and you notice that you're only leveraging Azure AD for your online services, then you should probably go take a step back and think about, hey, what other capabilities exist that I can leverage to use on premises and in other cloud systems? I sincerely hope that you liked this video. If you did, click the like button below and subscribe to my channel to get more information or to get an update when new content is added. Thanks, and see you next time.